Sweet dreams, real dreams, we hate when it's ending. Feels good outside of reality, this time we spending. But their alarms blaring, it's time to wake us up. Sunshine, he poured me in your cup, so I'm hot and uncomfortable. We ain't lukewarm here, you gotta sip it slow. It's gonna burn a little and you might have to blow, but get it, take it in and it's digestible. What? We talking ruddy brew, good to wake you up. Expelling rubbish too, almighty stirrer fuck gave us a count of you. Not to destroy the kingdom, but trying heretics, exposing real treason. Jake, wake up, come taste to see a double entendre. It's strong, it's black and pure, sip the ruddy brew world. Wake up and here I'm trying to tell you something, no need to fear the truth. I am the ruddy brew. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. Years trapped making mental notes. They stole the youth so they wouldn't be exposed to lineage and trying to return, but it's spiritual now. We're trying to learn, confused. At first reading Braille they didn't get to choose. In the wilderness we weren't meant to lose, but we said yes to the curse.
Welcome to the Ready Brew. My name is T Edge, and we are here very, very late at night, but I want to go ahead and get this this discussion out of the way. I couldn't put this one off another day, but you know what we say here. This is a place where we use biblical information, historical information, and a little bit of DNA information to try to get us back to center, because it's all about us as a collective. No one person is better than the other. And tonight I don't really have, well, this morning, I don't really have any current events information to really talk about. Nothing new that really piqued my interest. I mean, of course, we have the usual, our president doing the things that he does. I guess to discuss a little bit with the soldiers that or the Navy seamen who are stranded on the boat. I say stranded, but they've been out to sea for 6 months now with no port call. Terrible living conditions as been reported. The president has said that there's another carrier moving into the area to give those seamen or those crewmen a relief. So that's to be seen. Outside of that, you know, he's making it light, making it seem like there's no such thing as, you know, these types of terrible situations going on aboard this Navy carrier. Then you have I saw a pundit. I don't know if he was a pundit or what he was. I know he said that he was ex-military, but he tried to make the claim that these guys were being soft because they, you know, had unfavorable living conditions and the like. I mean, but the reality is we live in a time, even when I was a teenager, although I didn't serve in the military, but still yet 30 years ago, we were nowhere near as advanced technologically as we are now. There's no reason in the world, with the way that everything was set up for supplies to be transported and, you know, to get things where they needed to be, there's no reason that these gentlemen shouldn't have had better accommodations, so to speak. So we have that going on. We're yet to see what that's going to turn out to be. While we have the president and people who like his brand of leadership, mocking the guys and trying to make light of their situation. But those things take a toll on your mental health. As reported, one of the crewmen dove off of the ship. I don't know if he was trying to end his life. I don't know if it was just a mental break where, just for a moment, he might have had the idea that he could swim home or whatever. I mean, crazy things happen um, when you're pushed to your limit. So I guess that's a bit of current events information that's circulating in the news. That's very heavy right now. Other than that, we do have Ty Blanche. Um, he's done an interview now where he's saying that uh, no attorney general should ever go against the president, and that it's in bad taste. And now we understand why our current president is on the retribution campaign that he's on, because he believes that the attorney general that was in office, or should I say that was in charge when he was in office the last time, um, gave him some pushback, and he didn't like that too much. So we're kind of seeing um, how things kind of roll into one, how these things kind of pan out. So that's another thing. Of course, we're still hearing talks about whether or not this 1776 fund is dead. People trying to get the rioters from January 6th paid. Some people believing that this is an attempt to turn those people into a paid militia so that they can protect the president and anything that he decides is unfair in the future. He will have a militia that will pretty much uh, uh, be his bodyguard, I guess you can say. I think that's why he's rushing so hard. Well, I can't say I think, but it feels like that's why he's rushing so hard to try to get this ballroom built, because in essence it's going to be like a bunker. So um, not necessarily with the midterms coming up, but when we see uh, the results of the election in 2028, is he going to be willing to step down, especially if he has a bunker that's fortified, that no one can get into, that's going to have bulletproof windows and walls, and it's going to be missile proof, as he says. Is this going to be his holdup spot if he loses in 2028? That's another thing to see, and it's all speculation, of course. But I mean, it's something to think about, because these are the things that we hear going on in our current democracy, in our news. And then they like to call certain things fake news, and they like to call reporters not good reporters because they report things that are not favorable to the current leadership. But I think that's where we have to be careful, because anytime where you have a leader in position who's not willing to, how can I say, I don't want to say play fair, but that leader is not willing to be a gracious loser, then you're going to run into issues like this, especially when you have people um, who look up to dictators and look up to people who are I can't think of the word. Uh, don't make me laugh right now. I don't want to say the wrong thing. My mind is kind of garbled because I've been trying to work on this thing all day. Plus, I've been, kind of out of the loop. Last night, I said, chat GPT. Listen, I have a topic, but I have short notice. I mean, I have a short time to prepare, what is a good topic that we can discuss? And went through all that, and um, I settled on our topic of discussion tonight. Before I get there, though, uh, unfortunately, I don't have any positive black news for this episode. Hopefully, if somebody's watching, you can provide some more information on where we can get some positive black news so that we can report on the positive things that are going on in our community, things that can lift us up so that we can see that everything is not bad. You have people, especially like Officer Tatum, who's putting out there that black people commit most of the crime in America when statistically, when we look at the FBI data, that is definitely not right. So we need information that's positive, stuff that's gonna that we're gonna be able to put out to build us up, especially for the youth that are coming along that are seeing these things. Because like I said the last couple of times we were on, one thing that is always going to be beneficial to those who are trying to suppress a demographic is to keep the young men docile and ignorant. And when I say that, I'm not saying it in a derogatory way. I'm saying as long as they're not uh, hip to the things that are going on in society, as long as they see it as as long as they see the negatives as positives, then you're never going to be able to advance. Because it's crazy how up until we're probably about 30, 35 years old as men, everything is fun, everything is parties, everything is going out and dressing nice and buying the nice cars and all these things. But then when you're 30, 35 years old and you have a family, you start realizing that maybe I should have locked in a few years ago. Because you're kind of playing catch up at that point. So if we can begin getting our young men, our youth, especially our young men, in a position where they're thinking early about advancing not just themselves, but their communities, their children, their women, then we can begin to start seeing more positive things happen in our community and less of the negative things. I mean, I did read last week how there has been a major decrease in criminal activity within the black community over the last few months. So knowing that this is a positive sign, I mean, when you really look at it, if we step outside of the frame for a second, when all this stuff began with our current administration and people started wanting to riot, the one thing that I think was beautiful that we did was stayed on the sidelines and paid attention. Because one thing that has always happened when we get out there is that we get demonized. When the Black Lives Matter movement, the most recent Black Lives Matter movement took off, you had rioters in the streets. People who were not even a part of our community were backing pallets of bricks up beside businesses and throwing rocks into windows and spray painting walls and what have you. And then when everything was settled, our community got the blame for it. So when it came to all the things that have been happening around ICE and illegal immigration, one of the best things that we could do was stay behind the scenes. Because we do more behind the scenes than we would in front of the camera. Because I believe that there were certain factions betting on us getting out there so they could also make another example of us, demonize us, then create a narrative as to why things are so bad. So I commend us for that. But with that, that shows how much value we bring to fighting for the struggle of equality, equity, and human rights. So maybe as times progress, we will be able to bring ourselves even closer together. I have some ideas myself. Hopefully, prayerfully, things can take off. But until then, we'll just have to see. But I don't want to be here too long tonight. I want to make sure that we get out of here in a timely manner. It is already 2 a.m. It's far past my bedtime. I mean, I've been keeping some late office hours here lately anyway, but it's still too late to be up doing this because I know a lot of people are resting. But I am still trying to get used to going live. I've been noticing things that I need to improve while speaking to you all. So, this is good practice time, as they say. But even in practice, I want to make sure that I'm getting good information out there. I want to build a catalog of great content. I'm not really that comical. In this topic, when we're talking about these types of things, I don't believe comedy is going to be our most influential characteristic. Um, so I tend to be a little bit more serious when I talk about these things because I don't want it to look like it's a laughing matter. And with that said, though, um, today I want to talk about the one drop rule. Where did the idea of the one drop rule come from? I mean, we have our notions, and we know what we've been told about the one drop rule. Um, but let's watch a couple videos here that I have prepared on exactly what we're talking about when we're discussing this one drop rule.
So far, we've placed a great emphasis on culture and how we protect it, and how we may exercise it through fashion and expression. But now, I want to discuss what it is that really unifies us all under this umbrella, which is race. As we just saw through our conversation with Quentin Thrash, black looks different from person to person. But that blackness itself is the through line that still connects us all. And, as history would have it, it only takes one drop to be a part of it. So, I've invited scholar, activist, culture worker, and author of One Drop, Shifting the Lens on Race, Dr. Yaba Blade, to educate us on the underlying element of blackness that unifies us no matter how we express it or what it looks like for us. Check it out.
All it takes is one drop. We know that black folks come in all shapes, all sizes, and all colors, even in our own families, and we've come to see this as some sort of testament, if you will, to the power of blackness. That somehow something is transmitting genetically through our blood that connects us to one another. So in many ways, we've come to accept the one drop rule as just the way it is. But at the same time, we don't necessarily see all black folks the same or even treat all black people the same. Given the history of racial mixing and passing and colorism in this country, we treat some lighter skinned black folks as suspect, like they're only black by default or by force, assuming that they really don't see themselves as a part of us. Not for real. In the history of the United States, a black person has been defined as any person with any known black African ancestry. It's been called the one black ancestor rule, the traceable amount rule, and the rule of hypodescent, but it's known most popularly as the one drop rule. The one drop rule holds that any person with any trace of black African blood, however small or visible, cannot be considered white. They must be considered black. Now, you should know that no other racial or ethnic group has their identity defined or counted according to the one drop rule. You should also know that the one drop rule is characteristically American. No other nation classifies racial identity, specifically black identity, this way. In fact, the one drop rule doesn't even make sense outside of the US. In many places, for a person of African descent, any one drop of anything else is enough to consider that person something else. So how is it that the United States came to adopt such a specific, quantitative definition of black identity? Well, during the period of colonial enslavement, European enslavers were at the top of the social hierarchy, and enslaved Africans were at the bottom. And for the most part, a person's position on that social hierarchy was recognized by the way they looked. If you looked European or white, light skin, slim nose, thin lips, straight hair, you were white. If you looked African or black, dark skin, broad nose, full lips, tightly coiled hair, you were black. And if you were white, you were free, and if you were black, you were enslaved. Simple. But this simple social order soon became complicated by miscegenation. That is, the mixing of the races. Now, when I say mixing of races, at that time, I'm talking about the rampant rape of enslaved African women and the children they were forced to carry in birth. Those children didn't look as white as their fathers, if we want to call them that, and they didn't look as black as their mothers, so what were they? They were referred to as mulatto. From the beginning, race mixing was viewed negatively, as were mulattoes.
So far, we've placed a great emphasis on culture and how we protect it, and how we may exercise it through fashion and expression. But now, I want to discuss what it is that really unifies us all under this umbrella.
Apologies. All right, try this again here.
Which is race. As we just saw through our conversation with Quinn.
So in many,
Try to find where we were.
they must be considered black. Now, you should know that no other racial or ethnic group has their identity defined or counted according to the one-drop rule. You should also know that the one-drop rule is characteristically American. No other nation classifies racial identity, specifically black identity, this way. In fact, the one-drop rule doesn't even make sense outside of the US. In many places, for a person of African descent, any one drop of anything else is enough to consider that person something else. So how is it that the United States came to adopt such a specific, quantitative definition of black identity? Well, during the period of colonial enslavement, European enslavers were at the top of the social hierarchy and enslaved Africans were at the bottom. And for the most part, a person's position on that social hierarchy was recognized by the way they looked. If you looked European or white, light skin, slim nose, thin lips, straight hair, you were white. If you looked African or black, dark skin, broad nose, full lips, tightly coiled hair, you were black. And if you were white, you were free, and if you were black, you were enslaved. Simple. But this simple social order soon became complicated by miscegenation. That is, the mixing of the races. Now, when I say mixing of races, at that time, I'm talking about the rampant rape of enslaved African women and the children they were forced to carry in birth. Those children didn't look as white as their fathers, if we want to call them that, and they didn't look as black as their mothers, so what were they? They were referred to as mulatto. From the beginning, race mixing was viewed negatively, as were mulattoes. I'm saying it now for historical accuracy, but you should know that mulatto is pejorative. Don't say it. So the lines between white and black were getting blurred. What to do? Whites were already a statistical minority at the time. There were more enslaved blacks than there were white enslavers, and they were afraid of losing their control. They needed to maintain a firm color line. The one-drop rule became critical in the defense of the white race. So various state governments began instituting anti-miscegenation laws. Racial mixing became illegal. In 1662, the state of Virginia passed one such law, proclaiming that, listen to it, any sexual intercourse between a white and a black was twice as evil. Racial mixing was seen as a threat to the survival of the white race. The one-drop rule helped to maintain white purity. So when it came to classifying mixed-race children, Anti-miscegenation laws followed the common law applicable to farm animals. Mulattoes born to enslaved mothers were relegated to slave status. It ain't matter if your daddy was white. If your mama a slave, you a slave. And the more and more mixing, the more difficult it was to just look at a person and know whether they were free or enslaved. And this was a huge problem for the social order of things. And because nobody pulling out your family tree to figure out who was who and what was when, all of those exact quantifications ultimately came to be understood as one drop. Anyone with any black ancestry was black, and they were treated as black, and they were denied the privileges of whiteness. By 1925, almost every state had some form of a one-drop law on its books, and until 1967, it was illegal to marry outside of your race. 1967. For generations, the one-drop rule not only helped to maintain the so-called purity of the white race, it helped to maintain white power. Although the one-drop rule was ruled unconstitutional in the 1967 Loving versus Virginia case, it lives on. In many ways, the one-drop rule has become the core of black racial identity, particularly in the United States. It's created the black race and the black community as we know it today, and it's come to define not only the history of blackness in the United States, but the racial history of the United States.
When we look at this one drop rule situation, it is categorically American. So American, in fact, that, as she stated in the video, to call someone a mulatto is now a derogatory term. And there are people in our community, sometimes unbeknownst to us, who are part of the community, who have felt outcasts because of the fact that they're not 100% black or African. I'll say it that way. So, just to get an understanding of how these individuals feel, I did load another video for us to watch. So let's take a look at this one here.
Hi friends, so there's this thing that happens when I make videos talking about race on my channel. Inevitably, somebody leaves a comment that's like, why are you even talking about this? You're not even black. And mind you, it's always white people who comment this, and I know why they're doing it. They're trying to stir shit. I get it. But that's been a common theme in my life, that racial identity is confusing and weird. So I wanted to make this video to clear everything up. I'm definitely black.
My name is Ariel. How do I describe my racial identity?
My name is Derek. I identify as mixed, probably trending African American, because that's how I visually present.
I think of myself as biracial, mixed race, however you want to call it. I'm trying very hard these days to call myself black as often as I possibly can.
Well, to clarify, I identify as both biracial because I have a white parent and a black parent, and black. And I want to explain why. My racial identity doesn't come in a neat package because neither does race, right? Like, our idea of what race is comes from mostly two things: how we look and what kind of culture we grew up in. And how I look is kind of a minefield. If you were to ask people to judge my race based on what I look like, it would sound like the It's a Small World ride. It's she's Indian, it's she's Filipina, it's my old boss telling people, oh, the new digital director is going to be great. She worked for Hillary, she's Latina. It's my friend from high school's mom asking who else is going to be at the party. So he goes, you know, Alyssa, Caitlin, Taylor. Oh, Taylor, is she the pretty Pakistani girl? It's what are you? It's a lot of people being very bold and specific in their wrongness. But of course, I'm racially ambiguous, so they have to put me in some kind of category to understand me. It doesn't really matter to them which one.
I don't know if ambiguity itself factors into my identity. I have other things about me that are ambiguous that factor maybe more so, like my gender presentation. Like, people see what they want to see in me, and, you know, back when I used to have very long curly hair, I would get stopped on the street by Moroccan people who'd be like, you're Moroccan, cool, let's hang out. And I'd be like, actually I'm not, but hi, like, nice to meet you. I feel like I could be from anywhere.
But whatever people see me as, they don't see me or treat me as if I'm white. Like, I may get called the wrong racial slur on the sidewalk, but I'm not walking down the sidewalk never having heard a racial slur, you know? My phenotype doesn't tell a simple story, so black is the answer to what are you? Black is the box I check on the form, because if you're just trying to figure out what kind of not white I am so you don't actually have to get to know me, that's the information you're looking for.
So I think, like, for me, woman of color is just like this powerful, like, beautiful way of describing myself. But within that, I'm a black woman.
The other major way we think about race is cultural, and that's messy for me too. I grew up in a very white area, and I went to a very white school, so I didn't grow up watching the same movies or shows or listening to the same music as my black friends that I've made as an adult. It took me a while to come into all of that.
I was like 23 before I knew like what a fade was.
Yeah.
I cut my hair every week. I've been cutting it myself since like college. I didn't grow up with the language to communicate like how I wanted it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, will do it myself. And it's not gonna be as good as I want it, but it's gonna be closer.
And it's not like my mom didn't try to impose some culture on me. Rest assured, we always had on Whitney or Mariah in the car. She was elected the first black woman president of the State Bar of Wisconsin, which is a huge achievement in her field. And she tried to get me to understand the gravity of that first. She took me to see Julian Bond when he spoke at one of their meetings. She even tried to braid my hair and put barrettes in it when I was little. But I knew that all of that stuff made me different and weird, and I just wanted to fit in a school where I was already the kid that everybody stared at when we did the Black History Month lesson in social studies. I didn't want to attract any more judgment.
My mother is white, she's a redhead. My father is Trinidadian. I think that for him, even when he was in Trinidad, he would refer to himself as red because he's obviously black, but he's light-skinned black. He became black by moving to Canada. So I think that for him, he always felt a very strong tie to the Caribbean and to Trinidadian culture. And his black identity is very much tied to his identity as an immigrant. The identity that he passed on to us was the Trinidadian identity. You know, he wanted to make sure that we understood the difference between calypso and soca, that we knew how to eat really spicy foods and we knew how to make a good homemade curry, right? Like, those were things that were really important to him. Then talking to us as black women, that we didn't talk about a lot.
So my culture growing up was pretty white, and I'm trying to make up for lost time now and understand my history and participate in all of the joy that comes with black culture without being like appropriative.
I don't want to pull like where you're sort of claiming like the proud parts that you like, but as soon as there's like, you know, a negative aspect or like you face any hardship connected to it, you're like, I'm gonna skip back into my privilege, thank you. Nope, I am black. If there's any like negative aspects of that that like my privilege could get me out of, like I'm not gonna be the one who's like skips out of that.
Because there's not really like a deep, rich culture that just belongs to biracial people, you know? Like, neither of your parents quite share that experience with you. They can't pass down biracialness to you, and more often than not, your friends don't really get it either. You're just a little different to all of them, and that can be pretty isolating.
I do sort of feel that there's such a thing as biracial culture, in that it is a culture of confusion. Most every biracial kid that I meet has had to deal with some sort of like, who am I? How do I qualify what I am? What am I allowed to claim?
Look at Drake, for example.
Yeah.
Right? Like, talk about someone who would be like very much defining in the popular sense, right? Like biracial culture or like mixed culture. The beef with Pusha T, like, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of legitimate criticisms of him for his behavior, but you went after his identity as not being black enough.
I remember as a teenager where they would say some ignorant thing that kids say about people of color. I'd be like, guys, like, I'm right here. And they'd go like, oh, but you don't count, right? Like you're Ariel, you're not, you know, you're not black. It was so painful. Feeling like I'm not black enough is also so deeply tied into the degree of privilege that I benefit from, right? Like I navigate the world differently than a much darker black woman. I have probably a lot less challenges than a much darker black woman. So I think it's difficult to go like, oh, woe is me, I want to belong, and then also have an easier life because of this thing that makes me sad, right? I wanted to feel embraced by a culture that I love, and I wanted to feel like I was a part of it, not with an asterisk next to my name.
So I identify with being black along with biracial because it's a way to ground myself in something bigger than me. It's so important for me to claim my blackness now because I'm so proud of that part of me. I get, though, that being mixed affords me certain privileges. Because my skin is light and my curls are loose and I talk in a certain way, I'm adjacent to whiteness in a way that feels safe to white people.
People wanted to include me in their, or like sort of be happy that they had a black friend, because they like were very clear that they like sort of visually saw me as black, but they didn't want me to act the way they thought black people acted. They wanted me to have this sort of like performative whiteness.
I'm more likely to be the diversity hire because I'm not whatever stereotype they envision black people to be. It's not till I get hired that I get labeled too aggressive or too pushy or too insubordinate for advocating for even better inclusion. I straddle this weird line where I both benefit from white supremacy and am damaged by it.
If you look at the diversity quotients we get, right, it's not like a dark-skinned Mary Jane in the new Spider-Man. It's Zendaya. Light-skin privilege is still a thing, and so like representations in the culture do skew to a biracial place.
Because there's always going to be an element of privilege in there where I don't want to offend anyone and I don't want to overstep. But I also want to be able to claim my black identity, and also because I'm in media and I want to be able to represent, and I think it matters that a person of color has my job. And I think it matters that a black woman has my job and that a black queer woman has my job. You know, all those things are important.
So when people comment, you don't look black, why are you talking about this? It's because I'm trying to use my relative privilege to speak up about these issues. I'm trying to embrace my heritage and all that it entails. I'm trying to honor my mother and grandmother who taught me better than to hide from who I am. I'm trying to assert that black is something to be proud of. It's something that I'm proud of. I am so proud to be biracial and black, and I'm not gonna shut up about it. In the comments, please tell me a little bit about how you understand your own racial identity. If you like this video, please share it with someone else who you think might like it, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
So, as you can see, there is a such thing as, you know, not feeling black enough, or feeling too black in certain situations. One thing that we really don't seem to pay attention to is the fact that this thing goes a lot deeper than we actually ever thought that it did. Now, just to speak up for myself, I remember growing up in the 90s. In our community, we had biracial people, and we never really, well, I can't say we. I never really thought about people being biracial. I just always knew there were light-skinned black people and there were dark-skinned black people. My mother, although her parents were both black, was very light-skinned. So to me, another light-skinned person was just a light-skinned black person. I never really thought about biracial or interracial people. But when I got older, it was a shock because there were this one family in particular. We lived in the same neighborhood, rode the same bus, and they were a little younger than me, but I never knew that they were biracial. I always thought they were just black people. I mean, and they are just black people, but I never saw it as them having a white parent and a black parent. I just thought they had both black parents. But the reality is, in our community, lots of times we don't even pay attention to it. I mean, now you'll have the different discussions on social media today about people who are quote unquote color struck or who have a preference for lighter skinned people but what we don't realize in most of those cases is that this thing goes a lot deeper than we really ever thought. So I want to look at this paper here, this article, I should say, from the African American Registry. And I'm going to read this. It says, the one drop rule in America, a story. It said the one drop rule is referenced on this date in 1565 in St. Augustine, Florida. Once an American spoken phrase, the one drop rule morphed into a legal term used to separate white citizens from all others. It holds that a person with any trace of black ancestry, however small or invisible, cannot be considered white. Beginning with the Middle Passage and during the centuries of American slavery, people had interracial relationships, both forced and voluntary. In the colonial years, free people of mixed race, free people of color, were considered legally white if individuals had less than 1/8 or 1/4 of an African ancestry, depending on the state. Many mixed race people were absorbed into the majority culture based simply on appearance, associations, and carrying out community responsibilities. These and community acceptance were the more important factors if persons' racial status was questioned, not their documented ancestry. Not their documented ancestry. In the early colonial years, children born of one indigenous and one non-native parent usually had a white father and an indigenous mother. This was mainly because the majority of the early colonists were male. As many Native American tribes had matrilineal kinship systems, they considered the children to be born to the mother's family and clan. So I'm going to read that again. As many Native American tribes had matrilineal kinship systems, meaning everybody who was related from the mother's side, they considered the children to be born to the mother's family and clan. If they were raised in the culture, they were considered community members and therefore fully Native American. Due to the social mobility of antebellum society in frontier areas, many people lacked documentation about their ancestors. Although racial segregation was adopted legally by the southern states of the former Confederacy in the late 19th century, legislators resisted defining race by law as a part of preventing interracial marriages. In 1895, during a discussion in South Carolina, George D. Tillman said, "It is a scientific fact that there is not one full-blooded Caucasian on the floor of this convention. Every member has in him a particular mixture of colored blood. It would be a cruel injustice and the source of an endless litigation of scandal, horror, feud, and bloodshed to undertake to annul or forbid marriage for remote, perhaps obsolete trace of Negro blood. The doors would be open to scandal, malice, and greed. So this was, it was believed by George D. Tillman that every white person had some Negro blood. But to continue, it says, before colonization and still in traditional communities, determining belonging by the degree of blood was and is unheard of. Native American tribes, and I disagree with that, but it says Native American tribes did not use blood quantum law until the government introduced the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934. Instead, they determined tribal status based on kinship, lineage, and family ties. Historically, among patrilineal tribes, such as the Omaha, a child born to an Omaha mother and a white father could belong officially to the Omaha tribe only if the child was formally adopted into it by a male citizen. In contemporary practice, tribal laws around citizenship and parentage can vary widely between nations. Between 1904 and 1919, tribal members of any amount of African ancestry were disenrolled from the Chickamauga tribe of Louisiana, and their descendants have since then been denied tribal membership. The one-drop rule suggests that unless any person has non-white ancestry they can claim, such as Native American, Asian, Arab, or Australian Aboriginal, they must be considered black. This concept of intangible membership in a racial group has seldom been applied to people of any other non-European group. Those of black African ancestry have primarily used it. Langston Hughes wrote, "You see, unfortunately, I'm not black. There are lots of different kinds of blood in our family. But here in the United States, the word Negro is used to mean anyone who has any Negro blood at all in his veins. In Africa, the word is more pure. It means all Negro, therefore black. I am brown." During the 20th century American Civil Rights Movement, the dishonor associated with black African ancestry was considered a socio-political advantage. In the decades of the Jim Crow era, Tennessee adopted the one-drop statute first in 1910, and in Virginia, under the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, engaged in the passage of similar laws in several other states. Texas and Arkansas in 1911, Mississippi in 1917, North Carolina in 1923, Alabama and Georgia in 1927, and Oklahoma in 1931. During this same period, Florida, Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, and Utah retained their old blood faction statutes de jure, but amended these factions, 1/16, 1/32, to be equivalent to one drop de facto. So out of 16 grandparents, if they just had one, or out of 32 grandparents, they just had one, that'd be equivalent to one drop. There have been failed legal attempts at the federal level to dismantle whiteness as well. Ozawa versus United States in 1922 is an example. By 1925, almost every state had a one-drop law on its books or something comparable. By 1925, almost every state had a one-drop law on its books or something comparable. These laws gave power to bureaucrats like Walter Plecker of Virginia, Naomi Drake of Louisiana, and others who insisted on labeling families of mixed ancestry as black. Before 1930, individuals of mixed European and African ancestry were classified as mulattoes, sometimes as black and sometimes as white. The primary purpose of the one-drop rule was to prevent interracial relationships and thus keep whites pure. The assumption that blacks would be improved through white admixture was in step with this concept. White intermixture was in step with this concept. Despite the one-drop rule being illegal ever since the U.S. Supreme Court in 1967 overturned the Virginia Racial Integrity Act, as recently as 1986, the Supreme Court allowed the ODR to stand by refusing to hear a case against Louisiana's racial classification criteria as applied to Susie Phipps. Several authors and journalists have found it very profitable to out as black famous historical mulattoes and whites who were regarded as white in their society, who self-identified as such, and who were culturally European American. merely because they acknowledged having, often slight, African ancestry. Patrick Francis Healy, Peter Ustinov, John James Audubon, Henriette DeLille, and others. The one drop rule can mean that many light-skinned people are considered black. In many cases, the person can have more white ancestry than black. During slavery, there could have been a mulatto person who, because the one drop rule was considered black. Let me read that again. During slavery, there could have been a mulatto person who, because of the one drop rule, was considered black. If they had a child with a white person, the child would have been considered 1/4 black, but still considered black. Many people throughout American history have been more white than black, but were considered black. Sally Hemings, Carol Channing, G.K. Butterfield. However, these people are the exceptions, not the rule. Technically, the average person who self-identifies as black in America has at least 53% of their ancestors from Africa. Only 10% of Americans Only 10% of Americans who self-identify as black have less than 50% sub-Saharan ancestry. So when it comes to this one drop rule, when it comes to everything associated with the one drop rule, we see that it became a legal situation in America. And like this article said, it was believed that this type of thing didn't start before America, because in reality, we've always been made to believe that before Africa, black people and white people didn't really know each other. That's a common thread. A few whites went to Africa, saw some Negroes on a beach somewhere, lured them back on a boat, and took them to Europe to be slaves. That's kind of how the story has been given to us. But the reality is that we've been commingling since the beginning of time. Now, I always give this disclaimer. I believe that black people in the diaspora, descendants of the transatlantic slavery, no matter whether you're in America, North America, South America, or anywhere in Europe, and even other places around the world, I believe that we belong to the Hebrew people of Scripture. Now, the reason I say that is not just because it's a feeling that I have. In fact, this was something that I try to disprove, and this is why I'm on it so heavily now, because the information just kept coming. But there's so much information about it. The thing is, because terminology has changed, because the identity of peoples have changed, we have a mind's eye to see other people in places where they're talking about us. So with that, because I don't want to be here all night, we've already been here for about 45 minutes. I want to go ahead and jump into what I wanted to get into, because when we think about it, not black people and white people have not always been at odds, and this is what we have to realize. There have always been whites falling in love with blacks and black people falling in love with whites, because we always saw each other as people. It wasn't until there was a transatlantic slavery or kidnapping of people or redistributing of bodies that this thing started happening. So let's jump into something really quickly here that I want to look at just as quickly as I can. Let's see. Bear with me. All right. So if you're looking at this screen here, see if I can make it a little bit larger for us. It says the blood purity problems of interpretation, historical and methodological approaches. Now I need you to understand that this paper, the original language was Espanol. This paper, the reason I pull it up in the browser is because Google automatically translates the Spanish to English. So I want to go over this paper because I think there are some important things for us to see in here. It says the blood purity problems of interpretation, historical, and methodological approaches. Max S. Herring Torres. And the summary says this article presents a historical approach and theoretical methodological proposal for analyzing racialization processes prior to modernity. So prior to modern times, prior to being in America, this is a historical approach and a theoretical methodological proposal for analyzing racialization processes prior to modernity. To achieve this goal, the proposal engages with the debate of the potential racialized nature of purity of blood, taking into account the power of discourse and everyday practices. After tracing the history of both Spain and the New Kingdom of Granada, 15th through the 18th centuries, so 1400s through the 1700s, the Inquisition started in the 1470s, if I'm not mistaken. And they actually went through the 1700s. So yeah. But it concludes that stemming from peninsular anti-Judaism and racial sentiment, purity of blood in Spanish America became a colonial racialization strategy because it codified social relations hierarchically through bodily and cultural symbols. Now, this is the one thing I'm not going to say that I don't like, but one thing that's hampering about these research papers is the need for big words in order for the people who do the research to sound educated. All you have to do is talk normal, but I digress. So the abstract, it says, this article provides both a historical basis as well as a theoretical, methodological proposal with which to analyze processes of racialization before the modern period. To do so, the proposal is framed within a debate about the possible racialized character of the purity of blood laws, taking into account the power of discourse and everyday practices. After a historical overview, both in Spain and in the New Kingdom of Granada, 15th to the 18th centuries, the article argues that, starting from a racial anti-Semitism in the Iberian Peninsula, the purity of blood became, in Hispanic America, a strategy of colonial racialization because it codified social relations hierarchically through corporeal and cultural symbols. Now, two things were mentioned here that I need us to kind of focus on. It says racial anti-Semitism in the Iberian Peninsula. So we know in the Iberian Peninsula we had they called them the Negro Portuguese, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, or the Black Portuguese. And the other thing that I want us to pay attention to is Hispanic America and the purity of blood. So we have purity of blood in Hispanic America or South America, and we have racial anti-Semitism in Spain. So this thing went from Spain into slavery into Spanish or Hispanic America. So the concept of purity of blood. Well, before I do that, I want I want to go back real quick just to make mention, just as we read in the previous article, the belief was that the one drop rule was something that started in America after slavery had started. It was believed that this was a European as we know it, because when we think about Spain, we think about Spanish people, but in reality, Spain was a European nation, is a European nation. It's just when we think about Spanish people, we think about the people with the dark hair because that's how, it progresses. But like I said, I don't want to be here long, so let me not do a whole lot of explaining. So the introduction, the concept of purity of blood has been interpreted from multiple perspectives, and there's no consensus on its meaning within the framework of the history of racism. This argumentative tension reflects a broader debate surrounding the historicity of racism and the following question. Is racism an exclusively modern phenomenon, or is it a trans-historical one? Historically, does the imaginary of race and racial discrimination manifest itself in multiple forms or only in the singular? The objectives of this article are, first, to clarify the problem through some historiographical observations, second, to develop a historical approach to the problem, and third, to present a conceptual and theoretical abstraction to propose ways of inquiring into the problem of interpretation. Now, I don't think I'm gonna read this whole paper. I just want to touch on some things so that we can see, where we're kind of going. It says, part one, the problem. The aim of the following is not to present an exhaustive historiographical overview, but simply to comment on some perspectives in order to clarify the issue. It concerns an old controversy, only particularly resolved, which has recently been revived. Cecil Roth in the 1940s labeled the Spanish concept of purity of blood as racial anti-Semitism, and as a 15th century precedent for the Aryan legislation of the 20th. Albert Seacroft in the 1960s did not hesitate to call the pogroms of 1391 a racist sentiment, and the renowned Spanish historian Antonio Dominguez Ortiz considered the doctrine of purity of blood to be pure racism. Now, in Spanish, it's called Lempieza de Sangre, but because Google translated this paper to English, it says purity of blood because it's the American term. But Limpieza de Sangre is the doctrine of purity of blood that they were discussing. So when you go back into, if you want to look it up in its original form, you want to look or search for Limpieza de Sangre and not purity of blood. So let's continue. However, another group of historians distanced themselves from the previous position. In the 1940s, Guido Kish contradicted Cecil Roth and stated, "The racial concept and doctrine have no foundation in medieval law, either ecclesiastical or secular." Marquez Villanueva similarly refuted any racist meaning of cleanliness because it was not based on indelible biologisms. On the contrary, he pointed out its social and religious character. In recent years, these positions have been joined by novel approaches that have attempted to refine the historical argument regarding the modern age. For example, Walls's work with his proposal and genealogical racism, Yerushalmi's work and his approach to proto-racism, Nirenberg's research in which the means of race from the late Middle Ages are reconstructed, Seacroft's new interpretations in which he records the religious racism turn, Catherine Burns' research on Castilian racism, and for my part, I presented some years ago the hypothesis on racisms as chameleon variables. Now, I think it's important to note here, just like they do this to us, especially if you're, you probably haven't been, I ain't gonna say you haven't been, but maybe you haven't been researching this like I have. when I talk to ChatGPT about these things, this is the type of argument ChatGPT gives me. Well, back in those days, there was no real racism. All the discrimination was based on religion, or the discrimination was not based on race as much as it was based on what people believe. So they have designed it. They have designed their arguments to draw you away from thinking about the racial aspect of it to focusing on the religious aspect of it. Because once you look at the religious, then you take the humanity out of it, and it becomes something different. But let's see. It says, although the aforementioned approaches open new interpretive perspectives, their drawback lies in the lack of dialogue with the American past. A deficiency that has been recently addressed thanks to Martinez's work. But, I'm sorry, let me read that again. Although the aforementioned approaches open new interpretive perspectives, their drawback lies in the lack of dialogue with the American past. A deficiency that has been recently addressed thanks to Martinez's work. But while these historians ignore the transatlantic perspective, the peninsular perspective was also overlooked in Latin American historiography. In the recent work edited by Maria Eugenia Chavez, Genealogies and Difference, the editor asks, is it possible to identify the knowledge about enslaved Africans constructed in the colonial world with the concepts of race and race relations? She answers this question as follows. If we accept that the framework of meaning of differences anchored in the concepts of race and racial differences emerges from the mid-18th century or 1700s, in the context of the decline of Iberian colonial power and the consolidation of the new colonial powers in Northern Europe, the application of these concepts is clearly anachronistic. I particularly agree with Chavez's response. In fact, I have also partly argued that this in other works. I concur that in light of the work of Armando O'Gorman, Enrique Dosso, and Anibal Cuyano, it is not appropriate to project the concepts of race and racism with modernity onto the colonial past. But on the other hand, we believe that although the concepts of race and racial differences emerged in Europe from the mid-18th century, there were earlier manifestations of race with variable and independent historical meanings that enabled processes of racialization within framework of purity of blood in both Spain and Latin America. There were other conceptualizations of race earlier and with other historically situated meaning that encapsulate dissimilar concepts, articulated to purity, caste, color, and quality, a conceptual juncture that can be observed with regional differences based on norms, discourses, and everyday life. So let's see. Now, one thing I didn't do, things got a little hectic for me today, so I didn't get to go through this paper and read the whole thing. I just skimmed it yesterday, but let's see. Section 2.1, Forms of Exclusion and Specificity of Blood Purity. In Europe, both in the Middle Ages and the early modern period, exclusion was a part of everyday life. A state society differentiated its individuals through their social standing determined by the ideals of birth and blood. While avenues for social advancement existed, it is safe to say that this society was hierarchical. Fame and honor were principles that determined inclusion and exclusion within the estate system. Honor derived from lineage, profession, and estate, and functioned as symbolic capital. However, honor was not innate, immutable, or perpetual. It had to be guarded and protected. Honor was not a closed category and could vary. Criminals, vagrants, magicians, executioners, gravediggers, and prostitutes were all perceived as dishonorable, of course, not forgetting heretics and Jews. Jews were viewed as disciples of an irrational doctrine with no way out, condemned to the eternity of hell, and as a deicide people. They were also held responsible for epidemics, the desecration of consecrated hosts, and ritual murders, and were even stigmatized as the embodiment of perfidy, usury, and betrayal. In the Iberian Peninsula, medieval anti-Semitism intensified with numerous petitions were presented as the Cortes of Zamora, Valladolid, and Madrid, and at the Council of Salamanca, seeking to remove the hated Jewish financial elites. Although the kings protected the Jews by offering them refuge, defining them as a part of their property, this relationship of protection and dependence began to wane when on October 30th, 1377, King Henry II authorized a series of anti-Jewish lawsuits in the courts of Burgos. This was the first step toward the official exclusion of the Sephardim, which culminated in the riots of 1391. In short, the Jews represented a hated yet visible and controlled minority. Nevertheless, it is evident that Iberian societies were characterized by Judeophobic norms and practices, reflecting the classic anti-Semitism of the Middle Ages in Europe. Now, there was something I wanted to look into, or that I wanted to discuss further, but because it's so late, I lost it just that quick. Let me see. Oh, it said, remember if you followed or if you went back and watched the video from a couple weeks ago, we talked about things that happened in that book, the history of the Jews from the times, from the wars with Rome to the present times. And it discussed a lot of the things that happened to the Jews while in these different areas. So this just is another piece of information corroborating all of that we discussed then. It says, but in Castile in the mid-15th century or mid-1400s, a doctrine unique to the European context was forged. From the articulation of genealogical thought with anti-Semitism, the principle of purity of blood was configured as a specific form of exclusion, distinct from the general process of segregation of time. As a consequence of the riots of 1391 and later, the expulsion of the Jews in 1492, a wave of religious conversion began among the Jewish minority. Their objective at the end of the 14th century had been to survive the medieval riots and, at the end of the 15th century, to preserve their homeland and avoid the Sephardic diaspora. As a result of this process of forced assimilation, a process of socio-cultural mimicry occurred. The otherness of the Jews, visible through their clothing, their housing, their religious rites, their dietary practices, their skin color, became invisible. Invisibility meant relegating cultural practices to illegality, subordination, and crypticity. But over time, during the 18th century, Judaism gradually disappeared under the mantle of Christianity. During the conversions between 1391 and 1492, Jews became Christians, gaining access to new privileges, but also new obligations. Thus, they formed a new group, theoretically free from anti-Jewish ties, striving to attain new structure of power. This process of acculturation aroused suspicion. Envy, and profound fear in society, because the neophytes from Judaism were no longer visible and are beginning to become an integral part of Christian society. Consequently, a new legal definition, the Jewish convert, was developed to make visible what was no longer visible: their past, that is, their origin, traceable only through blood. Due to attempts at Christian homogenization, religious affiliation ceased to be a reason for exclusion, but religious origin did not. So, this tells us that the purity of blood began with the Jews in 1492 when the edict, I can't think of the name of it right now. But when it was passed, Jews began converting to Christianity to make sure that they could keep their homeland. Other Jews went ahead and left and dispersed out of the country, but there were certain who maintained their homeland but changed their religion. Now, I did say that their skin color was noticeable just a few moments ago, but it was also important to note because they were looking into purity of blood, the Jews were indeed mixing with the local folks. So this understanding or this idea that wherever the Jews went, they stayed to themselves and they didn't have families with other nations, that's not true, because we see here that the purity of blood was a thing. And even when you go back to scripture, when they were rebuilding the temple with Ezra, they even told you that the Jews had families with the Babylonians. So there's no way to ever make this assumption that the Jews stayed a pure race all throughout history, and never it wouldn't even be the same. I mean, it would also be the same in Europe during all those years that they were there. There were families mixing. Black people mixed with white people. We've been mixed with each other from the dawn of time. If you do your DNA, I am almost certain that you will find out that you have some European ancestry. Likewise, I remember this. It was an episode of Oprah Winfrey. This was many years ago, maybe 30 years ago. And there was this, maybe even longer than that. But there was this white man who was very prejudiced, and he was on Oprah, and he was saying how much he hated black people and why black people was this and that. And he knew that he was a pure white person and all this. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, and he did his DNA, and lo and behold, he had sub-Saharan African DNA. So just because somebody looks white doesn't mean that they don't have any African DNA, and just because somebody looks black doesn't mean they don't have white DNA. So I just wanted to bring that out. Let's see. Let me go down just a little further here, because like I said, I ain't gonna keep repeating it. I don't want to be here long though. I'll put the link to this paper in the comments. Oh, here we go. Excuse me. Let's see. I'll start from here. It says, in colonial society, wait, what section is this? So that we'll know, so we can timestamp it, or so that we can put a specific placement on it. This is 2.3, Impurities, Colors, and Qualities, Discourses in Everyday Life in America. So let's go back down. In colonial society, the most important symbolic operation in everyday public life was the recognition of neighbors bestowed upon one another. This is why, in addition to the principles of purity, race, and skin color, the aspect of quality must be considered. Quality was social valuation of an individual within a hierarchy of social means and values, according to their person, their judgment, and their circumstance. These notions corresponded to the values of peninsular stratified society based on honor, purity, and lineage, and were applied to the colonial world. According to the jurist Juan Solorzano y Pereira, 1575 to 1655, Creoles retained their quality in their blood despite having been born in the New World. In other words, quality was hereditary. Although quality was also linked to notions of heritage, it was not limited to these and depended on other factors, such as social performance, which can help us understand culture as performance. That is, quality had to be staged through social conduct and good reputation. Individuals had to have sound judgment and discretion, not have been defamed by excommunicated persons and other notable vices, be men of good reputation, and possess wealth. The quality of individuals in the colony had a broad dimension and was linked to descent measured. I'm sorry, linked to decent, measured, and honest public behavior, evidenced by their avoidance of vice and lascivious conduct. Quality was staged through behavior of clothing, economic status, housing, occupation, and socialization, and even through the consumption of liquor, tobacco, chocolate, celebrations, and funerals. Now, I think it's funny that it mentions clothing, economic status, and housing, as well as occupation and socialization here. I want to do a breakdown. Well, I just want to include that video, how to sell to a Negro, because I think that's important for us to really look into, because we think that it was just coming out of slavery that we were envious of what white people had and we wanted the best of life. But no, this is who we are, who we were from the beginning of time. So, but I digress. Let's continue here. It says, as a result of the new ideas of the Enlightenment, the logics of differentiation acquired new nuances through aspects such as civilization and progress, but integrated into colonial discourse. In the viceroyalty of New Granada, after the communal rebellion of the mid-1781, the Capuchin friar Joaquin de Fenestrade wrote the work The Educated Vassal, dedicated to the Viceroy Francisco Gele Limons, with the aim of highlighting the diverse population of the kingdom. He stated, as the birth of creatures is varied, so too is a character that enlightens or debases them. He also pointed out that Spaniards and their descendants represent the most distinguished character among the American people, glorifying their European origins. In his eyes, there was another class of people who are called white because nature itself did not want to debase them with the ignominious blemish that comes with the blood of black, Zambo, mulatto, and other castes of people, except for pure Indians. And further on, he detailed the variety of mixed race people, stating, there's another caste of people who feed on excessive drunkenness and idleness, friends of unbridled freedom without any application to the cultivation of the most fertile and productive lands. Similar to the Arabs and Africans who inhabit the southern towns, such are the Indians, the mulattoes, the blacks, the Zambos, the Salatros, the Tinte en el Aire, the Tercerones, the Cuatrones, the Quinterote, and the Colo or Mestizos. Those who have black and white blood are called mulattoes. Those of mulatto and black, Zambos. Those of Zambo and black, Sotoatros. Those of Zambo and Zamba, Tinte and El Ere. Those of mulatto and mulatta, the same. Those of mulatto and white, Terceron. Those of Terceron and mulatta, Salteratros. Those of Terceron and white, quarterman. Those of quarterman and white, 5-man. Those of 5-man and white, Spanish, who is considered outside of any black race. So as you can see, and this was written in 1789, this was showing all the different classes of, in this case, black people. Everybody that was mixed with a black person had a certain designation, except the mestizos or Colo, if I'm not mistaken, were mixed with Indians. But everybody else was black and white, or some variation thereof. So I just wanted to bring this paper out to show that this idea of the purity of blood predated or came before the one drop rule that we have here in America, because it ties everything back to the Spanish and the black Portuguese and Spain and the slave trade. So let's go to this next paper I want to look at, and then we're going to get out of here. We've been here for an hour. I don't want to keep you here too long. All right. And I just want to go to one part in this paper right here. Let me do let's do a control find. Oh, maybe I went to the wrong paper. Let's see. I'm gonna go back to the other paper because there was something I wanted to see. I wanted to show here that oh, here we go. This is the paper. Going backwards. Maybe. Lord. And bear with me here. I'm trying to find this particular mention that I read. Oh, this is it right here. So I skipped over it at the beginning when I should have read this part at the beginning of section 2.3. It says, in the Americas, as in the Iberian Peninsula, the concept of impurity of blood was applied against those who converted to Christianity. So I'm going to read that again. In the Americas, as in the Iberian Peninsula, so the same thing that happened in Spain and Portugal happened in the Americas. The concept of impurity of blood was applied against those who converted to Christianity. This wasn't just about regular black and white per se. This was a continuation of what was happening with the Jews and what was going on in Europe. Despite this normative analogy, it undoubtedly acquired new practical and discursive dimensions in the colonies. The indigenous presence, the slaves, and the process of miscegenation among all these groups, including the Spanish, led to a metamorphosis that even affected the metropolis. The Benedictine cleric and bishop of Pamplona, Prudencio de Sandoval, drew a parallel between impurity of blood, the race of the neophytes in Spain, and the blackness of their skin. So let me read that again. The Benedictine cleric and bishop of Pamplona, Prudencio de Sandoval, drew a parallel between impurity of blood, the race of the neophytes in Spain, and the blackness of their skin. So the neophytes in Spain were the new converts to Christianity, or the Jews, and it was the impurity of blood and the blackness of their skin. So this just tells you, or told you, that the blackness of their skin signified the impurity of their blood in Spain. So the Jews were black people. In this year, and then it said, in his work, History of the Life and Deeds of Emperor Charles V, he stated, in the year 1547, in the Holy Church of Toledo, by order of its Archbishop Don Ian Martinez Celisco, the holy and prudent statute was made that no one of the confessional lineage could be baptized therein, because where there is one of such evil lineage, there is little else. For these people are so malignant that one is enough to trouble many. I do not condemn Christian piety, which embraces all, for I would be mortally mistaken, and I know that in the divine reverence there is no distinction between Gentile and Iodian, for there is only one Lord of all. But Who can deny that in the descendants of Iodians remains and endures the evil inclination of their ancient ingratitude and misunderstandings, as in blacks, the inseparable trait of their blackness. So, again, just confirming things here. Let's see. In the historical reflection, he referred to the implementation of the statutes of purity of blood in Toledo Cathedral Chapter, advocated by its Archbishop Celicio Martinez, a fervent Castilian apologist for purity of blood in the mid-16th century. Around this time, the Archbishop of Toledo had used the term race for the first time in context of purity, referring to the lineage and the denial of access to ecclesiastical offices and benefices for Jewish converts. Likewise, Prudencio Sandoval pointed to the reprehensible morality of the converts, which according to him constituted a constant throughout history. From this apocryphal deduction, the author projected the principle of immortality and inscribed by analogy in blackness. So the person writing this paper believes, or he wants you to believe, that when he says blackness, that he's using it analogously or as an analogy. It says, let me read it again. From the apocryphal deduction, the author projected the principle of immorality and inscribed it by analogy in blackness, understanding it in Aristotelian terms as accident. From this he concludes with, although blacks may unite 1,000 times with white women, the children are born with the brown color of their parents. Thus, it is not enough for the Jew to be 3/4 nobleman or old Christian, for a single race alone infects and harms him, to be in all his sanctions extremely harmful Jews in the communities. In light of the above, the color black operated not only as a metaphor for servitude, but also as a sign of immorality that allowed the contagion, impurity, and vice of lineage to be visualized as heritable factors. Colonial power designated the native commoners and Africans as a source of impurity and perceived any mixture between and with them in negative terms. The invisibility of impurity in Iberian context began to be made visible in the colonies through the body. It is important to note that the indigenous nobility were declared pure and in this sense was equated with old Christians. However, it should not be forgotten that the indigenous nobility was a minority elite, although it is evident that purity of blood in the Hispanic American context underwent a significant change, being, only in this case, linked to a social class system, or it's linked to social class systems. Nevertheless, and including the above, it is clear that in Hispanic America, purity of blood was linked to skin color and had an impact on the majority of non-white and unprivileged population. So again, just wanting to connect those dots. It's important that we connect dots because when we begin to show people foundations, when people know where they come from, it begins to heal that broken part of them so that they can know of a foundation and they can begin thinking of other things. So I'm going to read a little bit, excuse me, of this next paper. This is also just to discuss the terminology of mulatto and all that. So let's it says just the title. Harry Torres, Max Sebastian, Resimus in der Vormodern der Reinheit des Blutes and Spaninia der frühen Neuzeit. So again, I apologize if I butchered that. I was trying. All right. It says, this book, whose title translates as Racism is Pre-Modernity, The Purity of Blood in Early Modern Spain, is somewhat abridged version of Max Sebastian's Herring Terez's doctoral dissertation entitled Purity of Blood, Norms, Realities, Ideology, Racism in the Early Modern Period. Purity of Blood, Norms, Realities, Ideology, Racism at the Beginning of the Modern Age. This version omits some of the references and documents in Spanish and Latin from the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries, consulted in the National Historical Archive and National Library of Madrid. The author refers specialists interested in other sources to the original manuscript. Excuse me. Herring's study is detailed and well-documented exposition of the origin and expansion of the principle of purity of blood. In early modern Spain, the work engages with the research of specialists on this topic and allows even the layperson to understand the scope and of the complex historiographical debates involved. The book is of great interest in specialists in the subject of purity of blood in Spain, but also as those in Latin America who study the origins and expansion of the principle as a defining element of the colonial and republican social order. The period covered in this book spans from 1391, when the persecution and riots against Jews began in Spain, to 1674, the year Francisco Terro Yanchilo published his Centennial Against Jews. Nearly 200 years after the Jews' conversion, the contempt they faced was justified in this book through humoral pathology. Biological factors allowed for the differentiation of old Christians from new Christians. Since Jewish impurity was believed to originate in the blood itself, this is how Torrigianchilo explained the infanticide rituals of which Jews were accused in the 17th century. Only by ingesting the blood of old Christians could these new Christians clean their stains. The concern that gave rise to this research stems from the contradiction of the author. It finds, in fact, that in the name of Christian doctrine, which posits a single origin for humanity, an impure and pure origin were determined for Christians after the conversion of Moors and Jews began in the Iberian Peninsula. The nascent Spanish nation faced the dilemma of embracing Christianity as the foundation of national identity and the principle of social homogenization in order to create a national spiritual lineage, or maintaining the prerogative of bloodlines, that had prevailed throughout the Middle Ages in order to guarantee the continuity of the elites in government. The solution was found in the dogma of purity of blood, which combined both approaches. The dogma states that those who bear the stain of being Jews, Muslims, or believers of any faith other than Christianity are tainted or infected. The peculiarity of this principle lies in the fact that the stain is transmitted from one generation to the next, even if the ancestors converted to Christianity earlier. In this way, it allows for the distinction between pure and impure Christians. Genealogical research then became the means to determine whether a candidate for public office, university admission, or entry into knightly or religious orders had any tainted, that is, non-Christian ancestors. So I think it's important to look at that one real quick. So it tells you that even if the Jews converted to Christianity earlier, they were still tainted because it was more than religion. It was their actual lineage, their bloodline, their blackness. It also mentions here, and this is important, that depending on their purity, depending on how much blackness they had, it determined whether a candidate could run for public office, could gain university admission, or enter into the military or any other religious orders. That is non-Christian answer. So this is important to see that, again, this one drop rule is larger or further along than just or earlier than we've come to believe. The author proposes the concept of purity of blood successfully activated three emotions as mechanisms of segregation: fear, distrust, and envy. These emotions were used to highlight such notable differences between the Moriscos and Jewish converts that they served to migrate to segregate these new Christians from the true Christians. The history of purity of blood is the history of minorities converted to Christianity. The study focuses on the case of the Jewish converts, since the groups converted from Judaism to Christianity, unlike the Moriscos, who concentrated in the Moorish quarters and often retained their Muslim religion and language, integrated into Christian society in such a way that they could no longer be distinguished by dress, language, or physical appearance. This allowed them to rise to privileged social spheres. For this very reason, they embodied, from the perspective of the old Christians, a serious threat to social order. So the Arabians that lived in Europe, they could change their clothes and they could maintain their religion, and they just assimilated into European culture because they had the lighter skin. The Jews couldn't do that. Herring's book is divided into 8 chapters, and the final one, in which the author reflects on the current relevance of his work, particularly in relation to the forms of racism with the National Socialist apparatus. The analysis begins with the legal status of Jews in the Middle Ages and the radicalization of anti-Jewish petitions heard in the Iberian Peninsula throughout the 14th century, especially in the courts of Zamora, Valladolid, and Madrid, as well as the Council of Salamanca and the Court of Burgos in 1377, with the aim of containing the rise of Jewish financial elites. The persecutions of 1391 and the Edict of Expulsion issued against them in 1492 forces Sephardim to convert to Christianity. The mass conversion that occurred throughout the 15th century fostered the representation of 2 castes, the old Christians and the new Christians. However, the path to conversion through baptism as a means of integration, far from resolving the situation of the unbelievers, exacerbated the conflict insofar as the Jewish problem was abandoned in favor of confronting that of the new Christians, and therefore the tainted Christians. The issuance of the Statute of Toledo in 1449 was followed by other laws that established a legal definition of condemning Jewish converts for conspiring against old Christians. Purity of blood became a legal category used to justify the segregation of new Christians. Purity of blood regulations were adopted in the prestigious universities, military and religious orders, municipal councils, and the Inquisition to control the admission of new Christians to these institutions and their influence in Spanish society. Analyzing the motives behind the ideology of purity is central to this research. The author delves into the Judeo-Christian theological antecedents of the notion of purity and sin as a dogmatic ideal, and examines how these concepts became interwoven with medical interpretations with pseudo-scientific framework. Theologians thus instrumentalized the anthropological principles of humoral medicine and the Galenic understanding of the body to diagnose the spiritual and physical abnormalities of the new Christians. The representation of the impurity of the soul, blood, semen, milk, and male menstruation became a religious fact demonstrated by biblical exegesis. Now, that paragraph by itself was so sinister. Oh my goodness. Now do you understand why we have so much medical, what is it called? Medical prejudice. What is the terminology they use? Medical. I can't think of the word. Medical racism. Jesus, why I couldn't think of that? Because it's late. Medical racism, because they took these people and they began studying their bodies. It says to diagnose the spiritual and physical abnormalities of the new Christians. The new Christians were Jews. Oh my goodness. The representation of the impurity of the soul, blood, semen, milk, and male menstruation became a religious fact demonstrated by biblical exegesis. That's why black people are not seen as humans to these people. They made us more than human. The concept of purity of blood is a functional racist argument because it combines religious and cultural elements with principles of Gallic and moral medicine. The latter aspect lends it a scientific character in the Aristotelian sense, and therefore, the author explains, it is not a modern form of racism or anti-Semitism. Yeah, the modern anti-Semitism has nothing to do with black people. Purity of blood is the construction of a rational argument using ingredients from traditional science and theology. Although it was used as an obstacle to social advancement, the stain of blood was not instrumentalized, as Herring suggests, by the Inquisition of physical extermination and the accused, which is why not comparable to the forms of anti-Semitic racism or National Socialism, nor is it considered antecedent. At this point, the author focuses on the precarious state of modern science at the time as the definitive factor, and considering the form of racism associated with the purity of blood to be pre-modern. All right. It's only a few more, but do I want to read these? Let's see. Let's see. I'll read a little more. Excuse me. So, Herring illustrates the workings of the exclusionary system through examples of how genealogical research was used to segregate Jews and question their social standing. Later, when tracing their origins became difficult, this research was also employed to discredit old Christians. Finally, the construction of the myth of pure ethnic past detached from any Jewish origin is examined in the works of Ambrosio de Morales and Fray Benito de Peñalosa. This historiographical effort was intended to unify the principles of Spanish national identity and legitimize the concept of purity of blood. The final chapter deals with racism. The dialogue with the authors questions whether racism can only be described when the notion of race is defined in the terms of the scientific character conferred upon the concept by the natural sciences, that is, around the 18th century or 1700s, or whether its use for purposes of ethnic segregation is a determining factor. Herring concludes that the system of purity of blood can be designated as racial anti-Semitism. It is racist because it fulfills a function of marginalization similar to that of the modern racism, and anti-Jewish because its Aristotelian theological foundation belongs to a tradition predating the modern age. It is striking that this form of racism, simply because it is not scientific, is considered to predate modern times. By employing the criterion of the absence of modern scientific thought, the author ignores the concept of emergence of the Spanish nation state and the formation of the overseas empire, as well as political and ideological use of the system. The author will surely be interested in the future, the practice and representations of the ideology of the Spanish colonies, where purity of blood, along with other anthropological arguments, were used early on to judge the differences between indigenous groups, order their catechization, control their labor, and manage the power of the growing mestizo and Creole populations. Regarding the pseudo-scientific concept of purity of blood, it is worth noting that neither then nor now can a more scientific use of the term be found. Even the argument was archived or rhetorical effectiveness comparable to the scientific nature of knowledge. This does not make the term race scientific, at least not when referring to human populations. In light of current knowledge, the impression of the definition is evident both when referring to Jewish converts and any other human group or any point in history. Social analysis should focus on understanding the ideological and cultural mechanisms that perpetuate the social use of terms race, despite all scientific clarification regarding its appropriateness. Hopefully, the author will soon prepare the Spanish translation of this work, which would undoubtedly stimulate reflection and research of the use of the system of purity of blood in America and broaden the context of the discussion on the role of segregation systems in the emergence of capitalist and colonialist world systems where racism has been a leading element of social order. So, all this that we've read, it talked about the Jews, the expulsion of 1492, how they began converting to Christianity to save their hide, so to speak. How after their conversion, they began to be distrusted by the quote-unquote old Christians or the European Christians. So different things started happening to them. Most notably, we had slavery that began in 1501, where Queen Isabella ordered the enslavement of Jews in the island of Hispaniola. This very thing, if you go a cruise, and they might remove it after I say this, but if you take a cruise and you go to the Caribbean, I forget at the moment, I can't think because it's late. But when you're walking around the port, the inland port where all the shopping center is, up under one of the awnings, they have like a little timeline, a couple of placards with timelines, and the timeline says specifically that Queen Isabella in 1501 had she had sanctioned, or she had permitted the transport of Negroes as slaves to Haiti. And it's because we didn't have access to books that corroborated this information that we didn't realize that those Negroes and that same Queen Isabella was the transport of slaves who were Jews. So this thing is much deeper than we have previously been told it was. Even more, just to round this thing out, slavery took place in 1501. There were Jews who had refused to convert to Christianity, who left Spain altogether. They went back into Africa. Some stopped in North Africa. Some went on down into West Africa. There was a book I read that confirmed that there was a road that went from the Mediterranean all the way down to Nigeria, or the Niger River, and the King Ferdinand knew about this road. So they knew where the Jews were. I read to you in the last video that Leo Africanus gave an account of Jews, well, Christians who were Jews that lived on both sides of the Niger, who had been exiled from Europe in different periods in history. So all of these things are corroborating each other. So when we get back to our topic for tonight, the one drop rule, they made us believe that this one drop rule was something that was holistically American. But in reality, the one drop rule is something that has come down from the 15th century through slavery, first known as Lempieza de Sangre, or the purity of blood. And it distinguished those with African ancestry from those who did not have African ancestry. You had mulattoes, you had quarteroons, you had octoroons, you had hexadecaroons. Today, mulatto is a derogatory term, but historically it was a designation about how much black or Jewish ancestry that one had. And the more Jewish or black ancestry one had, they could not hold public office, they could not attend university, they couldn't be a part of the military, so on and so forth. So again, we see how this thing goes through history. Now, to be a hexadecaroon, if I'm not mistaken, that means 1/16th European. I'm sorry, 1/16th African. 1/16th, if I'm not mistaken, is 6%. So when we're talking about lineage, when we're talking about DNA, we can look at our DNA tests and we can see that when you start getting down to 3%, they tell you that it's a non-factor, but it actually matters. This is how we began looking at our DNA reports differently, because now we know that this European ancestry didn't come from what they told us, where it was European men sexually assaulting or abusing our women. In reality, if that were the case, in most cases, it would be a closer match lineally. And that's just my opining from just thinking through, how this stuff works. But at any rate, when we get to where we are in history, when we start looking at who we are as a people, I think it's important, as I've stated already, for us to understand who we are from a social standpoint. We're not just some black people that they came and picked up from just seeing a couple of black kids playing on the beach somewhere. That's not how it happened. They knew who we were. We've always been a part of their society. In fact, when they talk about the black and brown community, the brown people that they speak of are those mixed people. And in some cases, they're people who had Middle Eastern ancestry that were always a part of our community. And we just always been together. That's why black people, when we start seeing, when we start seeing things like black people getting with white people, so to speak, when we start understanding people who are color struck, we feel like it's a knock on who we are as a people. But in reality, this is just how things have always happened. There have always been mixed race people throughout history. They just refuse to make this information known to us, because once you know this, once you understand these things, then you begin to have a different perspective, a different outlook, not just about history, but about who you are as a person. And the one thing that's important about knowing who you are as a person is it allows you to have a foundation. It allows you to have a background. It allows you to think more of yourself so that you can begin thinking through those things that you thought were impurities. So, I mean, here we are thinking that this one drop rule was rooted in American history when the whole time it was an international history. The one drop rule was taught to us as a way to minimalize the blow in some instances, because in America, all we were ever to see ourselves as was slaves. But here I am. I'm trying to connect the dots. I'm not here trying to make blackness the greatest existence. I simply want to make blackness seen. I want the world to see that we're normal people. Because of our history and faith, we fell victim to a program that was designed to make us perpetually insignificant. But one thing you can't do is trick God. See, when it comes to this journey, it's about more than just stepping into this role of community leader. It's bigger than proclaiming that other groups aren't real and we are the only ones who should be paid any attention to. Truth of the matter is that to be a leader, you must be willing to roll up your sleeves and do the work. And if God's giving you the vision of being a watcher, surely you're doing more than just talking. You're looking, you're listening, you're discerning. When it comes to the community, America just taught us how to be separated. There was a time when they knew that we were a diverse mix of people. We were a black and brown community. Slavery made us believe that the darker you were, the less valuable your life was. I mean, that's how some of us even think today. Persecution made it popular for the ancestors to push the marrying of lighter skinned people, to make the lives of the offspring easier in a separate society. The craziest part about what we've gone over tonight is that this is just the beginning. We're just scratching the surface of how these things pan out, how things develop or open up. I believe God is doing something. I believe that there's a reason this information is coming to light. I mean, I don't know. I'll just say this. I just showed how the one drop rule has been given to us as a nation. But then I showed where it started, at least the correlation of where this thing started from. So now it's up to us to understand why we're called black and brown, why we're the black and brown community, why there's a such thing as white allies in our community. But I mean, when it comes to the black and brown community, I guess at this point, it's just up to us. It's up to you to let me know if this is something that you would like for me to give my take on. But at any rate, I do again just want to say thank you for tuning in to the Ruddy Brew here tonight. If there's anything that you want to discuss further, drop a comment. You can reach me at theruddybrew@gmail.com if you want to have a deeper conversation. If you want to provide some information that I don't have. If you want to push back on something that I may have talked about, I'm more than open to having a conversation. Like I said, here the conversation is always welcome. So that's what we're looking forward to. But again, I want to say thank you for just tuning in. Thank you for giving me your ear. It's late. We've been here for a long time, and I tried to cut this thing down and still ended up being here almost 2 hours. But I'm grateful. I'm grateful that the Most High gives me access. He's given me a mind for this. He's given me a heart for this. And he's allowing me to do these things. So hopefully we can keep this up, and hopefully we'll have some breakthroughs that can again help us bring our community back to where it needs to be. Not as a debased community, but as once again thriving, productive, and wholly and thoroughly healed. But until the next time, thank you again for joining me here at the Ruddy Brew. Peace.
Welcome to the Ruddy Brew. This is the place you need to be. Here at the Ruddy Brew, I know just what you need to see. Bible, forensics, history, and DNA pulls all the pieces together, reviving the story and bringing the facts, unveiling what they thought was buried forever. Pull up a chair, grab yourself a cup. You know I wanna talk about it. Let's go.